This movie's awesome. Yeah, I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. Furiosa is freaking awesome. I mean, this is easily one of the best movies of the year so far. It is just so freaking good. And I say this as someone who has very little knowledge of the Mad Max films. The only one I've seen is Fury Road, but that is genuinely one of my favorite movies of all time, so as you can imagine, I was really, really looking forward to this, and it totally lived up to my expectations. It was a blast from beginning to end. But it's not exactly what I thought it was going to be. What I find very interesting about this movie is that it's kind of like an anthology film, because it's told in 5 separate chapters. Obviously, it's a prequel to Mad Max Fury Road. It follows the character of Furiosa, who is played by a different actress this time. In Fury Road, she was played by Charlize Theron, but here she's played by Anya Taylor-Joy. And I believe the exact reason for that was because George Miller didn't want to use CGI to have to de-age her, which I think is totally fine. But Charlize Theron did a great job in Fury Road, and Anya Taylor-Joy does a great job here. But interestingly, she doesn't actually appear until like 40 minutes in, because like I said, it's told in 5 separate chapters, and the first 2 are when she's Furiosa as like a young girl, so she's played by a different actress. I found that very interesting, but again, the young actress does a very good job. The first chapter is when Furiosa is very young. As I'm sure you're aware, Mad Max takes place in a post-apocalyptic world, but here she's in this like oasis of some sorts, but the oasis is discovered, so her mother and her friend go to like hunt down the people that spotted it, but they wind up getting killed, and Furiosa is captured by this guy named Dementis, who's played by Chris Hemsworth, and he is fantastic in this movie, but again, I'll get more into that later. So basically, the second chapter then follows her experience with him and what it's like as growing up, and eventually she is sold to Immortan Joe, who is the villain of Fury Road. He's like this cult leader, he's a dictator that controls all the water, he's got this army of war soldiers that are fully ready to die for them. Yeah, crazy. He controls a lot of stuff there, and Dementis sells Furiosa to him to be like one of his future wives, which, yeah, that's gross, so that way he can be in sort of control of Gastown, which is this giant oil rig that provides fuel for everybody. And then chapter 3 onward, we finally see her as an adult, where she disguises herself as a guy, and she becomes basically one of Immortan Joe's soldiers in order to survive. Right off the bat, I'm just gonna say, the action in this movie is incredible. It is some of the best in any movie I've ever seen. Again, Fury Road was great, and I don't know if this one exceeds it, but at the very least, it is on equal level. There are some phenomenal moments in here, with probably the biggest one is in the 3rd chapter, where we have this big truck chase scene, and everything about the sequence, from the action, the cinematography, the sound design, it is just so freaking good. That is easily the best part of the movie. Again, across the board, the action, cinematography, all of it is great. And for the most part, everything is done practical. There are some CGI elements, and a few of them are a little awkward, but for the most part, it's all really good. But at the very least, everything is super impressive. I really hope this gets the recognition it deserves in the future, because it is crazy impressive. But what's also very impressive about this movie is the acting, because a decent amount of the film is told with very little dialogue. Hell, again, Furiosa barely speaks in this movie, but Anya Taylor-Joy does a fantastic job. She's a really talented actress, and you can really tell with this performance. Just everything from the way she looks, even with most of her face covered, you can tell exactly what she is thinking, and it is super impressive. And Chris Hemsworth is a lot of fun as Dementis. He's definitely a more comedic tone to the villain, but it works really well for what the style of the movie is and what it's going for. He is definitely a highlight of the film. I find it kind of amusing that this movie came out the same year as Dune Part 2, because both of them have a lot of similar elements. Again, both have fantastic action, both take place in the desert, both are kind of post-apocalyptic, and they both have great sound design. I think Dune was definitely more impressive in that aspect, but this is still really good. There's not that much music in here. It's definitely more of an emphasis on the sound effects, especially during the action sequences, and it's done super well. The loud moments really make you feel like you're in part of the action, and the quiet moments also really add to the series. I will admit there were a couple of moments in this movie that I thought were a little bit slow, but that is very few and far between. For the most part, this movie is just an epic ride from beginning to end, and it is engaging throughout the whole thing. Also, a very funny side note, when I saw it, they usually screened the rating of the movie, like, G, PG, PG-13. They said this was PG-13. It is not PG-13. Like, there are moments in this movie where I was like, yeah, that cannot be right, because this movie gets pretty freaking gory and gross, and it's done really well. Admittedly, the climax isn't quite as awesome as the truck chase scene that I mentioned earlier, but it is still some really great action. And I won't say what happens, but I will say this movie has one of the most disturbing yet hilarious forms of revenge I have ever seen in my life. It is just some amazing stuff. This is an awesome movie, and I'm really sad to hear that it's not actually doing very well. I know it had a pretty slow opening at the box office, but I think it seems to be making at least some of its movie back. I read somewhere that this movie was partially funded by like another studio or whatever, so it doesn't need as much as it normally would to break even, but either way, I really hope this movie gets more traction as it goes on, because it is an awesome ride, easily one of the best movies of the year so far. If you have the opportunity to see this movie, it is a high recommendation. It is an easy 9 out of 10.